The surprising facts about coffeehouse revolution across cultures. In the history of coffee, it has played a significant role in some important events. For example, Sultan Murad IV of the Ottoman Empire issued a decree to execute coffee drinkers. King Charles II sent spies to monitor coffeehouses in London, as he considered them sources of false news. Nevertheless, coffee sometimes encouraged revolutions and revolutionary ideas. During the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, prominent philosophers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Isaac Newton spoke about coffee from a philosophical perspective. Coffeehouses in Paris became a refuge for revolutionaries, where significant events like the storming of the Bastille were planned. Famous thinkers such as Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre wrote some of their last works in these coffeehouses. According to some studies, coffee consumption has influenced the formation of ideas throughout the ages. The revolutionary impact of coffee is evident in historical events and the ideas that emerged while drinking it in coffeehouses. Coffeehouses appeared in the Ottoman Empire as places for gathering and exchanging ideas, and they were considered a socially equal environment where everyone could enjoy coffee at affordable prices. This phenomenon helped reduce social disparities. However, not everyone was happy with this change. In 1633, Sultan Murad IV issued a decree banning the consumption of coffee and tobacco. This decision led to internal conflicts, as Murad IV's brother and uncle were killed by the Janissaries, the Ottoman infantry forces who were inclined to frequent coffeehouses. The Sultan made great efforts to hunt down coffee lovers, even to the extent that he would disguise himself in ordinary clothing and walk the streets of Istanbul. He personally beheaded one coffee enthusiast. The Ottoman sultans banned coffeehouses in the 18th century to prevent rebels from gathering against the empire. Nevertheless, coffeehouses had already spread across Europe by that time, instilling fear in the hearts of kings as places where crowds would gather. Pasqua Rosé opened the first coffeehouse in London in 1652, an event that caused a revolution in London society. British culture was highly structured and organized, so the idea of sitting in a coffeehouse next to someone and considering them equal was quite unusual. The distinctive feature of English coffeehouses was the shared tables, which were covered with newspapers and pamphlets, where visitors would gather to drink coffee, discuss the news, and sometimes even write the news. Thus, coffeehouses became a driving force for the news industry in London during the 18th century. During the reign of King Charles II of England, there was great suspicion regarding gatherings of people discussing political matters, as his father, King Charles I, had been beheaded during the English Civil War. In June 1672, King Charles II issued a decree imposing restrictions on the spread of false news and ignorant talk about state affairs, and he asked people not to speak with ill intent in public or private settings. To address this situation, Secretary of State Joseph Williamson deployed a network of spies in London's coffeehouses. In December 1675, the king ordered the closure of all coffeehouses in London, but this ban lasted only 11 days, as the public opposed the measure and insisted on keeping the coffeehouses open. After King Charles II's failed attempt to ban coffeehouses, they became centers for intellectual discussions during the Enlightenment. In Oxford, locals referred to coffeehouses as penny universities, where individuals could attend discussions and debates for the price of a cup of coffee. The writer Samuel Pepys recorded some of the intriguing conversations he overheard in these coffeehouses in his diary. Most coffeehouses catered to specific groups of patrons, with one being a meeting place for the British Whig Party and members of the Royal Society like Isaac Newton. Other coffee houses were frequented by poets such as John Dryden and Alexander Pope, as well as the writer Jonathan Swift. In one of the coffee houses in Exchange Alley, London, stockbrokers would gather to trade stocks after official trading hours, marking the beginning of the London Stock Exchange. Another coffee house served as a meeting place for sailors and merchants, where Lloyd's of London, the insurance society, was founded within its walls. The influence of coffee houses began to spread as travelers returned to their countries, becoming coffee enthusiasts and participants in stimulating discussions. King Frederick the Great of Prussia was a staunch opponent of coffee. In September 1777, he made efforts to criminalize coffee drinking and promote beer consumption instead. He required coffee sellers to register and granted licenses only to friends of the royal court. He even employed former soldiers to sniff out the smell of roasted coffee in the streets. In his 1799 speech, he expressed his displeasure with coffee consumption and praised the benefits of beer. The ban on coffee was lifted after his death, and discussions about its benefits continued in coffeehouses. American taverns began serving coffee alongside alcoholic beverages, and the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston became a major meeting place for the Sons of Liberty during the War of Independence. In New York, a coffeehouse called Merchants was famous for organizing national meetings aimed at liberating the colonies from the rule of King George III of Britain. In the 1780s, this venue became the center for establishing the Bank of New York and reorganizing the New York Chamber of Commerce. In London, Benjamin Franklin wrote an open letter to Lord North from one of the coffeehouses, mocking the king's authority over the American colonies. American taverns began serving coffee alongside alcoholic beverages, and the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston became a major meeting place for the Sons of Liberty during the War of Independence. In New York, a coffeehouse called Merchants was famous for organizing national meetings aimed at liberating the colonies from the rule of King George III of Britain. In the 1780s, this venue became the center for establishing the Bank of New York and reorganizing the New York Chamber of Commerce. In London, Benjamin Franklin wrote an open letter to Lord North from one of the coffeehouses, mocking the king's authority over the American colonies. During the French Revolution, French coffeehouses were important places for instigating and organizing republicans, alongside their role in promoting social equality. A royalist writer from that era commented on the source of the agitation, saying, "Where does all this frenzied agitation come from? It comes from a crowd of small officials, lawyers, and unknown writers who stir up trouble in clubs and coffeehouses. These places are considered hotbeds that feed the minds of the masses with lies." Coffeehouses in Paris witnessed significant historical events during the French Revolution, as one coffeehouse hosted calls for the armed storming of the Bastille. During the Enlightenment, another coffeehouse served as a meeting place for intellectuals like Rousseau, Diderot, and Voltaire. After the Revolution, coffeehouses became centers for the exchange of ideas among writers and thinkers. They were also venues for expatriates like Hemingway, Stein, Fitzgerald, and Eliot to meet. In the mid-20th century, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre discussed their ideas in Parisian coffeehouses, contributing to the development of their philosophy. This culture embodied coffeehouses as spaces for intellectual and cultural interaction, where coffeehouses around the world hosted historical meetings that influenced the formation of ideas and cultures.